Hello everybody, welcome back to Read and Reread. I'm Angelia and here's a bonus video today. It is my BookTube prize judging video. So for the past couple of months I have been I've been reading books in, let me get this right. Quarterfinal fiction group D. And I will put a graphic of what those books were right here, and I might use it a couple of times. So, da 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 da. And so my task was to read these 6 books it was April and May, and then rank them in order from 1 to 6, with 1 being the highest and 6 the lowest, and then submit those rankings. There were 4 fiction groups of 6, and that group of 24 has now been cut down to 12. I'm going to tell you about how I rank the books, a few thoughts on each book, and kind of what my experience was in this process. Now, if you follow Roz from Scally Dandling About the Books, she also judged in this same group, and I just saw her video and she ranked the books very closely to how I did. So I will include her video as well because it was kind of funny for me to watch. I almost thought I could just Photoshop my head onto her video and it would almost work. But I am still going to go ahead and do my own version of this, and we weren't like 100% identical. So you have to wait and see where our rankings differ. But anyway, that was kind of fun to watch as well. And I really enjoyed this experience. I am a BookTube prize judging newbie this year. This was my first time to do it, and it was very fun. I had put my name in the running back at the beginning of the year, and I was not chosen for the first round, and that's fine. They have so many judges, and people can pick fiction or nonfiction, or that they would do both or either, and I only put in for fiction because that's really my strongest reading area and my area of most interest. I read nonfiction, but I read it pretty lightly, and I did not want to be suddenly needing to read 6 nonfiction books in a short period of time. That's kind of a daunting task to me. So I just put in for fiction. So I was not chosen in the first round because they had many more fiction than nonfiction judges. So I was very excited when I was chosen in the quarterfinals. I keep forgetting what group we were in, the quarterfinals. So anyway, let me just quit blathering and move on to the books. So I'm going to go from bottom to top and explain how I ranked the books. And this was not just, well, number 6 was easy, and then after that it got hard. So going into it, I had already read 3 of the books, and I had my assorted thoughts about those books. And then there was 3 that I had not read. So I had to finish reading them all before I could figure out how to do them. So of the 3 I hadn't read, this book was the one that I read first. And when I read it, I thought, oh my gosh, please don't let there be another book that I want to rank lower than this book. So I read The Daughter of Dr. Moreau by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. Now, here I had just a tiny bit of bias coming into this because while I had not read any books by this author, Stephen had read Mexican Gothic and found it disappointing, and he had mentioned this to me. And he didn't mention it to me right then in the context of the BookTube. He had mentioned it to me one day in a bookstore because I saw a copy of, I think it's called Velvet is the Night, and it looked kind of intriguing, and he said, oh no, don't read that, because her other book wasn't very good. So I was like, And so then I didn't think about her very much, and then this book assignment came along, and I thought, oh, okay, but I'm going to try to keep an open mind because this is a different book, and maybe it's really good. Maybe I'm going to love it. So I read it, and for me, it was not very good, and I did not love it. So this book is a retelling of H.G. Wells' classic story, The Island of Dr. Moreau, but it is still in the 19th century, but now instead of, well, I don't know where the island is in the first story, but I think it's sort of a British story. And now the doctor is European, but the island or well, is it still an island? Well, anyway, they're in Mexico. They're in the Yucatan Peninsula, and they're in an isolated area. And we have a kind of a mad scientist type doctor who it wants to be isolated because he's doing genetic experiments, and he doesn't really his early stages of his experimentation did not gain him any favorability in Europe, and so he has run out to this isolated place. And he is there with his beautiful daughter, Carlotta, who has a deceased mother who was apparently a local resident. And he has sort of not a groundskeeper, but kind of a manager of the property. And there are hybrid people / animals living on this island, and that's his experimentation. And he depends upon the patronage of a wealthy landowner who is hoping that the doctor will provide a cheaper, free kind of slave labor force for him with these hybrids. And so that's why he continues to support the doctor financially. The doctor just wants to do his research, and he has a lot of failed experiments apparently. So this is what's going on, and then into the mix comes the doctor's grown son. And anyway, I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about this book, but here's the general gist of things. It's supposed to be science fiction. It's almost more like light horror, and the ground that is trod upon about the ethics of this has so many footprints in it already that I'm not sure why we're going back over it. More about this rather torrid, weird love triangle and some startling revelations that occur about Dr. Moreau's experiments that are not startling to anybody except a couple of main characters in this book. So it was just kind of, for me, it just was not a strong novel. So that was number 6. And it was a long and distant away 6. Then I had 3 books that were kind of a mash in the middle, and it's exactly the same 3 books that Ross talked about. And it was kind of difficult to figure out which ones these were, because these were all good books. These are all, I thought, were worthwhile reads. Number 6 was the only one that I wish I had not spent my time reading, and it was like not a book I would ever pick up on my own, or I would have DNF'd it if it wasn't for reading for a purpose. So the next 3, I enjoyed these reading experiences, and all these books had strengths or weaknesses for me. So, but then I had to make a decision. If I could just do it any way I wanted to, it would have been a bottom one, a middle place of 3 books, and then a top prize of 2 books. But I didn't get to do that. So I had to keep ranking them. That's my disclaimer. So here we keep going. Number 5 is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I feel like this could be a controversial placement. And remember, I'm not saying that by number 5 it was like a little cut above The Daughter of Dr. Moreau. It was like about a mile above that one, and it was a very kind of enthralling read for me, but it just was also such an aggravating read. I did talk about this book a few months ago because I read it before the time of this contest. So I have some old video somewhere where I talk about this book. Let me tell you a little bit about it or my thoughts about it, because most people have heard about it at this point. But it is about a friendship. It's about Sam and Sadie, who meet at a children's hospital when they are kids. Sam is there because he was in a devastating car accident, and Sadie's there because her sister is receiving cancer treatments. And Sadie is the one who is able to draw Sam out of his shell when he hasn't talked for months following this terrible accident. And they become very close, but something happens that causes a rift that goes on for a really long time, years and years. And that's the pattern of Sam and Sadie. They'll be briefly hot and heavy, really good friends for a little while, and then there'll be some little misstep, some little misunderstanding, and someone gets super pissed, and then they don't talk for years and years. And that just really drove me crazy. The other aspect is this book takes place in the world of video game development. And Sam and Sadie invent a game that hits it really, really big when they're still in college and very, very young. And they become wealthy and very well known very fast. When I first heard about this book, I had some friends who'd read it, and they said, "Oh, you don't need to be into gaming at all, and it's still so good." And well, yes and no. I'm not into gaming, and I was still able to read it and be engaged in it, but you can't just skip over those parts because they're so essential to the characters and to the plot that you have to read them and understand those parts to really get anything out of the book. So you're kind of stuck with it whether you're interested in it or not, and I'm not. Nevertheless, I persisted. So I read on. And so anyway, it goes across several decades and about the different things that happen to them in their personal life and at work. My favorite character was Marks, who is Sam's friend that was his college roommate, and he becomes an important part of the work life and the personal life of the three as they being the three main characters. And I really loved him. I thought he was the friend that I wish Sam and Sadie would have continued to be for each other. And there's a lot of things in here that also were interesting about Sadie working in a field that's dominated by men and cultural appropriation in some of the content of their games. But just at the core, I was so chronically aggravated by the way that these two people treated one another and sometimes themselves that it kind of left me in a bad headspace some of the time. I was just so frustrated with them, and I thought how exhausting it would be if these were real people that you had to spend your work time being with their dramas that didn't need to be. So for that reason, that was number 5. So what's in number 4? The number 4 book was Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. This is Patel's first novel. She's actually quite a young author who is still I don't know if she still is. She may have finished by now, but it says she's a law student from Chicago. And she has an intro that explains a little bit about what she had in mind in writing this book. But Kaikeyi is a feminist retelling of a very well-known epic from Indian folklore, the Ramayana. And in that tale, there is sort of a wicked stepmother who banishes her stepson and instead places her own son on the throne at a key point in history. And Patel wanted to take a second look at this legend and think, well, wait a minute, maybe Kaikeyi had her reasons for this choice, and what could they possibly have been? So I'm interested in how this book would come across as someone who has grown up more familiar with the Ramayana. That I didn't know anything about it. Somebody who's been hearing it all their life might have a really different take on this book than me, and if you are that person, please tell me in the comments, because I was just kind of going into it almost just like a fantasy novel with not a lot of background about the folklore that is involved. But she does talk in the intro about hearing the story with her mother and her grandmother and having her own thoughts about it. So that was the task that she put forth for herself. So Kaikeyi grows up in a household with a whole bunch of brothers. And so she's just this one girl among all of these boys. And she is that classic character who does not want to just follow the traditional role of a lady and a wife. And so she gets her twin brother to teach her all the things that he's learning on the sly. And she learns how to fight and drive chariots. And she also spends a lot of time in the library in her palace looking through old scrolls. And I love this part of the book that their library is scrolls, because this is before printing. And she finds by accident, looking through the scrolls, something called the binding plane. And it's a magical skill that she acquires where she can see the invisible threads that bind her to other people. and she can manipulate them and try to strengthen bonds or detect fraud and different kinds of things. And so that's an important part of the book as well. And then she gets sent off to marry someone to strengthen the alliance between some kingdoms at a very early age, against her will, as often happens in these stories. And so then another large part of the book is about her trying to find her footing as the third wife and seeing what she can do. How can she be of value and importance in this new adult life? And she decides to see what she can do about making life better for women, improving their situations, giving them some agency. And this is where the feminist part of the book is the most strong. And then we get up to the part, we don't get up to the part that's where the actual ancient legend begins until pretty far into the book, because she has to go through all these years of the children growing up and everything. But so here's what I thought was strong. I love the part about her childhood, and I love some of the parts about the things that she did while being the new young wife. But I felt like it also lagged. And there, I mean, look, it's very thick and some of it doesn't need to be there. There are long, slow spells where not a lot is going on. There's some long, drawn out battle scenes. And I guess for some people, for some readers, that is exciting, but those put me to sleep. I don't care there's nothing you can do to make a battle scene exciting for me. They're just boring to me. And so some of those, I'm just kind of like, I get to the end, I'm like, who's dead? Who's not dead? Can we just cut to the chase? So there was some of that. And so that's really my overall, that's why it's kind of right here in the middle of the pack. The story itself to me was intriguing, but it was too long. It was enjoyable. It was something I probably wouldn't have picked up on my own, so I'm glad that I read it. Okay, so number 3 for me was Stories from the Tenants Downstairs by Sadiq Fofana. I read this book last fall, and this did end up in my top 25 books of last year that were in an earlier video. And it was in I did my top 12, and then I did like 12 more down in the description box, and this was in there. I thought it was a very strong collection, and I think it was a first book by this author, Sadiq Fofana, who lives in New York and is a public school teacher. And this is a book of linked stories about people who live in a certain apartment building in New York City, and they are struggling with gentrification. The building has, the people in the building do not have a high income, but the building is being renovated and spruced up, and the rents are going up. The long time practice of people getting some leeway on late rent has come to a screeching halt. People are being told that they have to leave their long-term apartments and move to smaller, shabbier apartments in the unrenovated part of the building if they want to keep the same price. And so their way of life is just slipping. And for some of them, it's a multi-generational experience of living in this apartment complex. And we move from person to person, and they have stories, and people appear in other people's stories. A few of the stories were very compelling to me. The whole book was good, but some people's stories just resonated more with me than others. The ones that were particularly memorable that I'm still thinking about are the one that was written in the voice of someone who is a teacher's assistant, one of the people that is one-on-one with a student with special needs, and the experience that she has of trying to help her student in a class with a new, inexperienced teacher who really does not have a handle on where he is teaching and the nature of the needs of the students that he has. And she's not in a position to tell him what to do because she's just the assistant, even though she is way more experienced than he is. And it's also about her struggles to make ends meet, working days in this very taxing teacher assistant job and then nights at an airport. And so that story was it rang very true to me as someone recently retired from the education system. And then also there was a story that is written as a letter by a young boy to his friend's mother after a tragic event has happened. And it is in this voice of a 12-year-old and in his style of writing. And it's a really beautiful story. And so those two stood out to me especially. It was a strong collection. And in this strong set of books, though, it only came in third because there are two books that I read after the time I read this last year, books that I read just recently that catapulted above this one for the top two spots. So now we come to the top two spots, first and second place. And this was another leap. So we had the bottom rung, the worthy contenders in the middle, and then there was two books that I just loved, and they battled for first place. And I spent days on this. I spent entire days where one of them was first place and then the other one was first place, and I just tried to let it simmer and come to some sort of a conclusion before I sent in my votes. But then finally I had to just go with something, and so I did. And so in second place, although sometimes I still wonder if I should have made it first, is Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. And this is a book I would not be surprised if I could see everybody's votes. I bet that this was in every one of the 6 slots on different people's lists, because I have just heard so many different reviews of this book. I have heard very, very strong reviews. I've heard DNF reviews or did not care for it reviews. So I am sure that my high placement of this book was not replicated by every single voter. For me, I put it in second place. This was a book about a young woman named Cushla in the 1970s in Northern Ireland, and it's during the time of the Troubles. And Cushla is a school teacher, a young teacher. I think she's 24. And so in the day, she's with her 3rd grade class, and in the evening, she tries to help out in the family bar. We learned that her father has recently passed away, and he is definitely, his presence is in this story. We know that he was a positive influence in his family and in his community, and he is greatly missed and grieved. And that's part of what's going on with Cushla in this story. And so she's trying to help out. Her brother's trying to keep the bar going, and her brother walks a fine line because the bar's clientele is a mixed group, Irish and Protestant. There's British soldiers in there, and he's just trying to keep the peace and to keep it kind of a neutral ground. But there's always that element of things about to blow up. Someone hits on Cushla when she's working in the bar, and her brother doesn't say anything, and things like that. So she's doing that, and then she's going home and trying to care for her mother, who is sliding further and further into alcoholism. And so her everyday life is pretty dreary, and she embarks upon a love affair with and she's Irish, this family's Irish, and she embarks on an affair with a married Protestant lawyer named Michael, who comes into the bar. Michael is probably 20 years older than her. He's attractive, he's intelligent. This is a secret relationship, both because of their two different, they're Irish and Protestant, and he is a married man. It's not hard to understand why she finds him attractive, why he finds her attractive, and it's not hard to see that there's no way this is going to work out, and that the tension that is just bubbling below the surface, that something is going to happen. We don't know what it is. And another part of the story has to do with her efforts to help a young child in her class who's dealing with a lot of obstacles that are things that she thinks are going to be helpful backfire. I'm making it sound very grim, but there's actually a lot of humor in the book as well. Cushla has a sharp sense of humor. She's got a witty, sharp tongue. Some of the conversations between she and Michael, and also she and her friend Jerry that she teaches with, she has witty comebacks. And so it's not entirely grim, but it's pretty dark. But it's a very realistic story. It's a really good story. There's no there's no extra fluff or padding to this story. It's just very finely rendered, and it is an excellent novel. So I enjoyed that so much, and I could not decide whether it should be first or second place. But I had to go with my heart on the day that I finally decided to vote, and I gave the first place spot to a book that I talked about a few months ago, maybe in March on this channel, and I raved on and on about it, and it is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This book, folks, is weird and wonderful. It is so strange, but it just emotionally hit me harder. That's why I finally decided to put it first, because while the other book was really good and I really appreciated it, this was the one that I just sat and thought about the way that the people felt and what would this be like. And maybe a lot of people would say that about the other book, but this is the one that got me in the feels the most. So that's why it got the #1 spot. This was about two women who are married, and one of them is a marine biologist, and she works for some sort of sketchy, shadowy company of underwater research. It's never entirely clear what was supposed to happen on this submarine scientific expedition, but whatever it was, that isn't what happened. So she goes on a expedition that's supposed to last, I don't remember how long, like 2 weeks, but she ends up being gone for 6 months. The submarine gets lost or something. There's a small crew down there, but when she comes back, she is very different, and there are cognitive differences, communication differences, physical differences, and they are progressing, and it is very strange. And then we also have another ongoing part that are Leah's notebooks that she wrote while she was down in the submarine. So on one level, this book is a very strange, speculative book about a very murky and unexplained scientific mission. And then on another level, it's about relationships and marriages, and what do you do when the person is still with you but yet they're not, and how do you care for this person? Leah is not what she was, so she's there, but her wife is mourning her already, even though she's alive, and not understanding what to do, and reminiscing on just the simplest things that they used to enjoy, like watching TV. And it's just, and then she goes back to how their relationship began and some things about her own personal background and her own traumas. And I don't know, it's one of those books that it's very, very hard to explain what this book is about, except to tell people that if you usually like the books that I say were good, I really loved this book. And I loved it so much that I put it in first place. So that's the one that I would want to reread. That was another one of my deciding factors. If I had to read another one of them again right now, which one would it be? Our Wives Under the Sea. I would read that again, see what else I could extrapolate from it, and just to feel all of those emotions once again. All right, so that was my rankings from bottom to top. That's what I submitted. Now, when the judging went through, of my 6 books, the 3 that went through were Our Wives Under the Sea, Trespasses, and Kaiki'i. Stories from the Tenants Downstairs did not make the cut, and neither did The Daughter of Dr. Moreau, thank goodness, or Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. But I was pretty happy. I was happy with the results. I was very happy that my top 2 went through, and I am happy about Kaiki'i as well, because I thought that it is a worthy contender, and for more people to have a chance to read it in the next round that maybe haven't discovered it yet. So that is my wrap up. I did get an assignment for the quarterfinals, and I will put up the graphic. I have not delved into them very much at this point, but I'll put up a graphic here at the end of the 6 books that I need to read for the next round, which is June July, and I will have further comments about those as time goes on. But that was my experience. I had a great amount of fun, and I'm really excited that I get to participate again in the semifinals. That's what we're doing now, the semifinals. So let me know what you think. Let me know your thoughts on any of these books, or if you also were a judge, what did you have to judge, or how did it go for you? And until next time, that's it for now. Bye.